All right. Welcome to another action lesson. This lesson is actually going to cover two actions, one called listener window focus and one called listener window remove focus. So the purpose of these two actions is to run a flow whenever the focus of the browser tab is removed and the other for whenever it's re-engaged. So for instance, if your user is moving between tabs or between window screens, you can track that they have left the screen and track that they've come back to the screen whenever they get back to your app. You can use this for all kinds of things. Like for instance, you could track the amount of time spent on a page. You could also stop certain running actions. If you have something running on a loop, you could stop those whenever they leave the page and restart them when they come back. For our purposes of this lesson today, we're just going to enter the date time of when they enter and when they leave into these two text boxes. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start by adding a couple of flows. We'll start with one that I'll call set time entered. We'll add a set value action. We'll select where we're going to set the value, which is going to be the time when entering. And we're going to use a concatenate input type here because we're going to concatenate a simple text time when entering, and then another value of a system value of the current full date time. So we're just going to see the entire full date time of when they enter. And then let's duplicate that flow, change it to time leaving, swap out for the other text box, change this to when leaving, and it will set the full date time. So now let's nest the time entered flow into the page load. So time entered. So when the page first loads, we're going to set the time entered into this box, but leave the time leaving alone. So if we go ahead and preview this, we can see that it sets the current time of when that occurred. So my time, I'm on Central Time. If I refresh, you'll see it'll update here. So what we want to do is make it to where when I lose focus off the page, like if I go back to the studio, for instance, it would enter the time that I left. And when I come back to the tab, it would re-enter the time that I came back. So let's go back over to the studio and we're going to add our set of listeners into our page load. So I'll add an action. And the first one we're going to do is on window focus. So this is whenever the browser window comes into focus. The one we're going to run there is setting the time entered. So now whenever the page loads, it will set this listener. And then anytime that the browser tab becomes the focus for the user, it will reset the time entered into that text box. Let's add another listener for removing focus, meaning that whenever the user is no longer focused on your browser window that's running your app, when the user clicks to something else, it will run the flow that's selected here. And we're going to set the time leaving when that happens. So now let's go one more time back over to the preview. And I do have to refresh here. So we have our time, but now if I go back to the studio and then come back here, we'll see that it will enter a time leaving for whenever I leave. We'll stay a few seconds over in the studio and then we'll come back over into the preview and we'll see that the time entering has updated as well. So right now this says 15:24:25. So let's go into the studio. We'll give it a few seconds here and then we'll go back over to the preview and we can see that we left at 15:24:53 seconds. We came back 5 seconds later at 15:24:58. So anytime I leave the page or come back to the page, we'll see that these things are changed. So I was only gone for 1 second there. Using these flows that are being run, so the set time leaving, I could, for instance, every time that they enter, create a record and track that, or I could run a tracking event in another tracking tool or an analytics tool. Or I could start a flow or stop a flow, do anything that I need to do here. So it gives you really nice granular control over the user being active with your project. All right, that's it for this lesson. Thanks so much.